majority of Americans don't realize that one of the most important parts of the Constitution was the section that gave the people the power to amend the Constitution through a convention of states. And this is something that I've known about for years. And I'm going to be perfectly frank. When I first heard about it, I was like, this is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Like, who's going to do this? This is going to be full of wackadoodle people. It's going to be out of control. People are going to put all this stuff in the Constitution. It's going to be a nightmare. But over the last few years, I have had the opportunity to talk to people involved in the movement that have slowly moved my opinion. And I've taken the time to educate myself about what an Article 5 convention would look like. And I'm pleased to have president and co-founder of the Convention of States Action Group, Mark Meckler, to join me today to talk about what it is, what they do, and more importantly, what it wouldn't do, which I think is where a lot of people get hung up. Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mandy. That was such a good intro. I need you to travel and go on the road with me. That was perfect.
I am a trained professional, so let's be real. But let's start with you for a moment. How in the world did you get involved with a move to do a convention of states to amend the Constitution?
Well, it goes back 15 years to the beginning of the Tea Party movement. I was one of the early adopters and co-founders of Tea Party Patriots. And so I helped build this vast movement. We swing Congress in 2010. And then by 2012, I realized it didn't do anything. All those people got eaten by the swamp. I was ready to just go back to private life and out of politics because I was so frustrated. I got introduced to this idea of calling a convention of states by a guy by the name of Mike Ferris. He's the founder of the homeschool movement in America. And what he told me is that I was approaching the problem incorrectly, that I thought that the problem was a personnel problem only, but that fundamentally we had a structure problem. And that if we didn't fix the structure of Washington, D.C., it really didn't matter if we kept electing good people. It was going to continue to go down the drain. He introduced me to this idea of using Article 5 to call a convention to restrain federal power. It took me about an hour of explanation, and I was in. I was looking for a way to fix the country. I'm not a person who wants to complain if I can't propose a solution, and this is the solution that the framers gave us.
Okay, so let's talk about Article 5. Let's dig deep and have our nerd conversation about what the Constitution actually provides. What is Article 5 and how does it work?
Yeah, and if people don't know about it, I don't blame them. I'm a lawyer by training. I didn't know anything about Article 5. Article 5 is the provision whereby we're given the power to amend our Constitution. It's a pretty short provision. There are two ways it says we can amend. One is when 2/3 of both houses propose an amendment, then it goes out to the states for ratification, and it takes 3/4 of states to ratify. That's 38 states to ratify. And the part that we've never used, all the amendments have come through congressional recommendation. The part that we've never used is where the states call a convention. It takes 2/3 of the states to call a convention. And then again, it's just a suggestion, and it gets put out to 3/4 of the states for ratification, same as if Congress proposed it.
So where is, I think when I first started talking about this, and I'm not exaggerating, I think maybe 6 states had passed the resolution to call for a convention of states. Where are you now?
So currently, 49 states have introduced it. 19 on the verge of 20 states have passed it. North Carolina's passed it through their through their House, and we're just waiting for Senate passage. That'll be state number 20. So we're well over halfway to the 34 number we need to get to convention.
Now, this is where it gets tricky, okay? This next question I'm going to ask you, because people have this idea that if we called a convention of states, we would basically be crapping all over the Constitution, and it would just be a free-for-all, and you'd have the abortion wing, and they'd be over there to codify abortion into the Constitution, and you'd have, law enforcement advocates trying to do this, and you'd have these people over here trying to do this, and it would just devolve into chaos. How does the process work so that doesn't happen?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. And first, I got to say, if it were that way, the Heritage Foundation wouldn't have endorsed us. And you mentioned that before we got on there. There's a great Heritage Foundation article about this, why they're in favor. Texas Public Policy's in favor. Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin was one of the original movers in the movement. Obviously, none of those guys would be open for just cracking open the Constitution. The way it works is 34 states have to agree in advance on limited subject matter for the convention. And they've done so. So far, almost 20 states have said we can talk about term limits for Congress and other federal officials. We can talk about fiscal restraints on the federal government. That would include things like a balanced budget amendment. And we can talk about restricting the scope and power of the federal government, meaning things like no more Department of Education, no more Department of Energy, no more National Institute of Health or Department of Health and Human Services, specific restrictions on federal government authority that should have been there in the first place. So when you go into convention, 2/3 of the states have already agreed on those limitations in advance. They will commission their delegates or commissioners to the convention. Each of them will have limited authority based on that application. And then it's important to remember, and to me, this is absolutely the most important part, no matter what comes out of convention, it's just a suggestion, and it takes a super majority or 38 states to ratify.
So you would essentially have to convince, and I am on board with all of these things that you mentioned 100%. You would essentially have to come up with these literal constitutional amendments, and then they'd still have to go through the ratification process in each state. So let me ask you this question. If the states that don't pass the Convention of States, what is it, a request? A petition? What do you actually call that?
It's called a resolution.
A resolution, thank you.
Technically speaking, they call it a resolution.
So let's just say California does not pass the resolution. Do they still get to seat delegates at the Convention of States?
Yeah, this is what's called a general convention, and it means all of the states would be invited to convention. So we don't expect all more than 34 states to pass the resolution. We get to 34, that's what's going to start the convention. But all the states who don't pass it, they're going to come anyway.
And I'm fine with that. I mean, I want everybody to have representation if we're talking about the people getting together to amend the Constitution. But when you then have to send it back, and California would have the right, would it go to the voters to ratify it? Would it go through the legislatures?
Yeah, there are two ways specified in the Constitution. One says it can be done by legislative ratification. The second says by state ratifying conventions. For all 27 amendments we've used legislative ratification. It's Congress will decide which one in advance. And the state ratifying conventions, really, it's whatever the state decides those are. So either way, the state legislature will be in control of ratification.
So will they also decide who to send? Like who the representatives are to? How does that process work? Because I got to tell you, right now in Colorado, it's such a dumpster fire here that if the governor were to send people to the Convention of States, they would literally be useless as tits on a warthog. I mean, it would not be productive. So how are those people sent?
Yeah, I think that's true. Plenty of states. My former home state of California is the same way. New York, New Jersey. The way it works, though, is the legislature chooses them. Governor has nothing to do with it. That doesn't give us any more comfort in states like California or Colorado now. Legislature will choose. They'll choose them however they want to choose them. They'll send as many or as few as they want. Each state gets one vote. That's really important. Colorado has the same amount of votes as Texas or New York. But I think what's really important to understand is at convention, the process is not going to have room for the crazies. And what I mean by that is when you have 34 states that all have agreed in advance what the potential framework of the convention is, those three areas I discussed, it doesn't matter if California or Colorado or whomever sends crazy delegates and they want to try to do other stuff. That's just not available procedurally within the convention.
So this texter on our text line said, I don't trust the Convention of States to preserve the Second Amendment. And this is exactly the same issue that I talked about at the beginning of this. People don't understand that the Second Amendment is not on the table in any way, shape, or form, correct?
The Second Amendment's not on the table. It doesn't fall within the application. But I want to give the texter even more confidence about this. And this is important. As conservatives, people who love the Constitution, we have to be rational about stuff. I think we are the rational side. And so I want you to look at it like this. Currently, there are 29 states, Florida being the latest, that have constitutional carry. It means you can carry your gun with no permit. There are 24 states where you actually can carry your firearm in the state capitol. I've done it in a lot of them where you're allowed to do it. There are 14 states where you're allowed to take a long gun loaded into the state capitol, sling it across your back and sit in the gallery and watch the process. There's absolutely no way, no matter what, that you can get 38 states to ratify anything that would do away with the Second Amendment. That's just ridiculous. People say this all the time. It's really bad. It's fear mongering. Where that came from, this is super important. It came from the radical left. This is the radical left's way of trying to get us to not call a convention of states. This is the way to use the Constitution to save the Constitution. If they can make us afraid to do it, afraid to use the tool that the framers gave us, well, look, the left already amends the Constitution all the time through the law and through the way the courts interpret the law and the way the Supreme Court has over 115 years. We need to use the method that the framers gave us, and there's no reason to be afraid of it.
So I'm going to continue to play devil's advocate because I just got another text that said, there goes our Second Amendment. So people really are not getting what you're saying, Mark. So let's just say we're at this convention. I am playing the role of Colorado because in Colorado right now, our legislature is trying to pass some of the most restrictive gun laws in the country. We are going to be disarmed here in Colorado if they are successful. So we've got our idiots from Colorado at the Convention of States, and they raise their hand and they're like, I want a constitutional amendment about making the Second Amendment not a thing. What happens?
So if you picture the way a legislature works, and most of your listeners will know this. So there's going to be somebody up at the front of the room who was elected by the majority of the states that are there. The majority of the states will be Republican states because by far that's the majority of the states. The president and or the parliamentarian will gavel that person out of order. And they will say, this is not germane to this convention. And they'll move on to recognizing the next person. It's that simple. Well, let's just say I'm wrong and that didn't happen. I mean, people do crazy things sometimes. Then you would have to get the majority of states to agree to that, to vote it out of the convention and to send it out to states for ratification. That takes 26 states. Remember, I just said right now in the United States of America, there are 29 states that have constitutional carry. How are you going to get 26 states to vote it out of convention when 29 states allow you to carry a handgun without a permit? 14 states allow you to carry your handgun or your loaded long gun into a state legislature. 24 states allow you to carry your gun inside the state legislature, your pistol. It's just ridiculous and absurd to think that we're going to lose the Second Amendment. And if you need proof, on our website, you can look up Chuck Cooper. Chuck Cooper spent decades as the attorney for the NRA suing on Second Amendment issues on behalf of the people, on behalf of gun owners. And he says we have way more to fear from the Supreme Court in regard to the Second Amendment than we do ever to have fear from a convention of states.
So I want to be clear again, because now I'm getting questions from people on our text line that say, will the out of control judiciary be addressed at all? They have been the conduit of the most non-constitutional things we're enduring. Let me read what the petition actually says. I have the language in front of me. If you sign this petition, this is what you're supporting. I support Convention of States, a national movement to call a convention under Article 5 of the United States Constitution, restricted to proposing amendments that will impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, limit its power and jurisdiction, and impose term limits on its officials and members of Congress. Those are the things that are going to be addressed, right?
Absolutely. And so where the courts fit in that, I think, is in a couple of places. One is in the term limits area. Most people don't think about this. Federal judges are appointed for life. Every study shows that the longer that they're in office, the more likely they are to rule in favor of a bloated and expansive federal government. Makes sense. They're federal employees. Their staff are all federal employees. They work in federal buildings. And so we want to do, I think we should impose term limits on federal judges. And that includes in some way on justices of the Supreme Court. So that's one thing we could do. The second thing, it says, scope and jurisdiction. We could literally limit the jurisdiction of the federal courts to things that we think they should be involved in and cut certain things out of their jurisdiction. There's precedent for this. Most people aren't aware. The 11th Amendment was intended to cut the Supreme Court's jurisdiction. It did so. That was shortly after the Bill of Rights. So it was very early in our history. If we think the courts are overstepping, a convention of states is the way to rein them in.
Mark Meckler is my guest. He is the founder and president of the Convention of States Action Committee. And I put a link to his website. So if you want to sign on to this, and more importantly, I put a link to a great white paper by the Heritage Foundation that answers so many questions about this, because I find it interesting, Mark, and I believe that the left would be the ones to kind of seed the doubt that this would get out of control and that we would lose all of our rights that we have and we'd lose the right to free speech and the right to assemble or whatever else it is. But none of that is on the table. And that needs to be clear. So if you want more information about how this would work, I know that there's been a simulated convention of states that took place in Williamsburg, Virginia, which is a perfect place for it. But if you want more information, educate yourself about this, because I will be the first to admit I dismissed it out of hand for a long time. But what else are we going to do? We keep electing people that go to D.C. and promise to change things, but then, to Mark's point, they just become part of the swamp, and then they think that the swamp is a hot tub, right? So we can change the people going in and out, but the system is set in their favor. It is set in the favor of corruption. It is set in the favor of the longer you're there, you're going to be Nancy Pelosi, a so-called public servant who's worth $220 million on a congressperson's salary. I mean, that's if that doesn't motivate you, I don't know what is. And they will never pass these limits on themselves. They will never do this. They will never restrain themselves fiscally. They will never restrain the size of the federal government. They will never pass term limits. So this is the only shot we've got. I mean, is that fair, Mark?
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. Look, there are other things we have to do. We do have to continue to elect the best people we possibly can. We should be fervently in prayer for the country and trying to return the country to its foundational roots of Judeo-Christian values. All of those things are important, but if we don't find a way to address the structural problems, we're still going to lose the fight. And to people who oppose this, I often ask, like, what's your solution? What are you proposing? Usually I get deer in the headlights, or they say more education or elect good people. My answer is, well, how's that working for you? And the answer is, well, it's not. It's not the solution. You can't keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. We all know that's the definition of insanity. This is what the framers gave us. This is what the left is trying to stop us from using. We've had hit pieces in every leftist publication over the last year. They're scared of us. They know this can reign in the federal government. That's why this is something we need to do.
I think this speaks to the helplessness that most people feel. It's why people don't think their vote matters, because they truly don't see it mattering in the grand scheme of things. This is a way to make your vote matter in a big way. So I would urge people to at least look at it, think about it. There is a rally on the west steps of the Capitol on April 25th. Mark, are you going to be testifying at the committee hearing? I told Mark he's going to be testifying at the Kill Committee. I'll be surprised if they even listen to you. If they don't just put their heads down on the desk and nap while you're talking. That's how bad it is here.
So my co-founder, Mike Ferris, will be testifying there. Look, I testify in front of hostile committees all the time. I love doing it. It's a challenge. It's enjoyable. Usually they grill us in some way. So yeah, I'll be there. I don't care whether it's a Kill Committee or not. Look, we have seen this resolution move forward in legislatures where you can't believe it. It moved forward in Hawaii through committee this year. We have 5 Democrat sponsors. There's no Republicans in the Hawaii Senate. We had 5 Democrat sponsors. We came out of that committee. We came out of committee in Massachusetts, actually 2 committees where it was 13-2 Democrat to Republican, because people are realizing across the aisle, D.C. is out of control. And it's out of control whether we have a Republican administration or a Democrat administration. I say that as a true blue conservative. The federal government grows under every single administration, regardless of who's running it. It's going to be up to we, the people, to restrain it. So I will be at the rally. That's on the 25th at 11 a.m. on the west steps of the Capitol. So come on out, learn more, meet me. I'm happy to see everybody there. Again, that's the 25th on the west steps of the Capitol, 11 a.m.
Mark Meckler, I appreciate your time today and appreciate what you're doing. And hopefully the movement continues to grow.
Thanks for having me.
All right. That's Mark Meckler with the Convention of States. And you can find out more information on the blog today. And like I said, I was so skeptical of this for so long. But y'all, when are we just going to recognize they're never going to fix it? And if you want to know why we have inflation that is out of control, it's because we're running deficits of $1.1, $1.2 trillion. Like it's nothing. Nothing. And we're talking about, well, we got to send another 40 billion to Israel. We got to send another 40 billion to Ukraine. My God, we're bankrupting this country. And this is the only chance we, the people, have to make this happen. Because it doesn't matter who we elect. They are never going to institute these changes on themselves. Because Congress uses our money to buy themselves votes. Congress uses our tax code to buy themselves votes. Congress uses insider trading to make themselves rich. And I, for one, am over it. I'm sick of it. I'm tired of feeling like nothing I say or think or do matters. So think it over. And when we get back, I will make a point. I just saw this question. The difference between an Article 5 Convention of States and a constitutional convention are completely different. This is just about proposing amendments, not trashing the Constitution. Totally different. Hi, Mandy. If we term limit, do we also reduce their lifetime benefits? Well, we could make that happen at a convention of states. Texter, we could do that. Let's make it happen together.